First of all, on the KK93, it works the same as your punch card bulkies and or any of the later models of your knitting machines. In order to read a pattern card, we will be working with your KC button, which is on the top right-hand side of the carriage. You will also be working with the punch cards that came with your machine. To begin with, we will start with pattern card number 1 and put that into our machine as an example to be working with. When placing the pattern card into your machine, you want to make sure, first of all, that the start line is placed towards the bottom. You have a clutch on the right-hand side of the machine that must be placed down, and then you may turn your card into the machine. Always make sure that when you do place this card into the machine that it is fit correctly into the grommets that are there so the card does not go in crooked. You also have a position here on the card that tells you whether the card is locked or whether it will advance through the machine. When we first start with our programming, it must be in position number 1. I will rotate the card through the machine so that I can clamp the card together so that it will rotate throughout my garment. With your machine, you got snaps that clamp the card together. You place the snap into the hole provided and then bring the other piece over the top. This allows the pattern to rotate throughout the machine. Then press down on your clutch, and by turning the card, return it to line 1 of the pattern. Have your carriage on the left-hand side of the machine when you start to program for your first pattern. This is not necessary once you understand using your punch card capabilities, but as a beginner you should start from the same side so that you always know where you're at. You've placed KC on, and when we come across, we will select our first row of pattern needles. As you can see, I have selected every other needle coming forward. This particular card does bring every other needle forward. Every other row, opposite needles are coming forward. I'm going to use this card throughout our demonstration today to show you all the various capabilities of this particular pattern card. So even though you see it listed in your manual as a fairaisle pattern, you'll see that we can use it for other things. First of all, I will press my tuck buttons. They are the buttons on the left-hand side of your carriage, and in this case I am pressing both of them. We have selected our first row of pattern. At this point, you want to advance your card by placing the lever to the right-hand side of the punch card to the 4 position. The needles that have stayed in the back position are needles that will do our tucking for us. And what happens to those needles is the yarn is just laid over them, it is not knit. The needles that have come forward to pattern position will do the knitting. Another thing we need to do when we set up for tuck work is on the bottom of our carriage we have tucking wheels. These wheels are located at this part of the machine, and you need to press them and bring them forward to help your work tuck for you. Then you place your sinker plate back on the carriage. Now with our tuck buttons on and good weight on for tucking purposes, we will knit a few rows of this pattern. You can also use this card and elongate the card, thereby repeating the same row twice. To elongate a card, you press it all the way back, the lever on the right-hand side, all the way back to the very far position, and this will make your card drop every 2 rows instead of every row. We now have a sample of what tuck work looks like. By advancing the card back to row 1 and locking it into position, I will remove the KC button, which you will notice release the tuck buttons as well. If you want to, you can also use the plain button to release those buttons. I'm going to take the carriage over to the opposite side of the machine, and this time use this card for 2-color work. I will place my KC button on again, and on the first pass I will select for my pattern needles. At this point, again, you have to remember to elongate your move your pattern button so that the card will advance every row. We will be using this for fair isle purposes, which means two-color work. So here we will be placing the top middle button on, which is called your MC button. Do not put both buttons on because that is for thread lace. We are only going to do fair isle at this point. You will thread the second color into B feeder on your carriage, and you will go on with your knitting. Again, we can elongate this card and repeat the row every 2 rows. We have now created a fair isle pattern that we see the purl side from the back side. When I take this off the machine, you will see the knit side. Here we have a sample of tuck work as well as two-color fair isle work. The purl side is normally the right side for your tuck work. Where we started here, you can see where the card was advancing 1 row at a time. Then we elongated the card, thereby making a bigger stitch. Using the same card, we went into fair isle knitting or two-color knitting. At the bottom of the piece, we see it 1 row at a time, changing colors. Then moving up to the next section, we see it elongated, changing colors on the same needles every 2 rows. We will now set up and show you how to do thread lace on your knitting machine. First of all, you need to take the carriage off of the machine and change your end needle selectors that are underneath the carriage. You have 2 little pink things that are underneath the carriage here that need to be turned off. What these do is they always bring your end needles forward to pattern position so that they will knit the contrast color. In this case, the contrast color will be the thread lace thread, which is too fine to knit to the side seam. We will turn our KC button on and knit 1 row across. At this point, we advance our card as we have done before, and then taking a very fine thread, we will place that fine thread into feeder number B. We will place both buttons on at the MCL setting. At this point, you continue knitting. If the end needle does come forward to pattern position, you want to take and push it back so that it will not only knit the contrast color. So you need to stop and look at every row and make sure that if that end needle did come forward, that you push it back. When you turn your end needle selectors off for punch lace, if the hole makes the needle come forward on your end stitch, it will still come forward. In other words, the holes on your punch card are the ones that designate the needles that will come forward to pattern position. And if a hole is designated to go to that needle, that means that that end needle will come forward whether or not you have turned your end needle selectors on or off. So if it does come forward, you do need to push that needle back. And here we have a sample of thread lace. The fine thread is very hard to see, but you can see just a hint of it here, and it gives you the look of lace. Now we will go on and I will show you how to do lace on the knitting machine. I have put into the machine one of our lace cards. You will see at the back of your set of cards that came with the machine a few cards that are numbered with red. Those are your cards that will do lace on the knitting machine. You must have your rails on at all times when doing lace work, and you will be using your lace carriage that is in the lid of your machine. Also, you have 2 settings on your lace carriage. One is for normal lace and one is for fine lace. Normal lace is when you take the carriage across the machine, it selects a needle, and in returning the carriage to the other side, it transfers the needle selected to the adjacent needle. It selects the needle in the direction the lace carriage, or it transfers the needle in the direction the lace carriage is going. If you are set up for fine lace, it will start that transfer when it comes back, but it will not complete it, thereby having 1 stitch on 2 needles. We will be set up to do normal lace for this demonstration. You will always program your pattern card from the left-hand side of the machine, and you will use your lace carriage for programming it. That's why you will notice on your carriage here that you have an L and an L setting. That means for normal knit or lace work. Again, we have our pattern card locked on row 1. We take our lace carriage across the machine. It selects the needles that will be transferred. Remember, when you are on this side of the machine, to advance your card, and when you take the carriage back in this direction, you will notice that you have transferred every other needle to the adjacent needle in the direction the lace carriage was traveling. You will knit 2 rows, and then you will run your lace carriage again. Now you notice that this time it is going to take more passes than it did the last time. The first time it was 2 passes of the lace carriage. If you end up on this side of the knitting machine and still have needles coming forward, that means you are not completed with your lace carriage. You still have to return the lace carriage to this side of the machine. No needles have come forward, but we have to get our lace carriage out of the way of the cam, so we have to return it over here. You also have an indication on your punch card that it is time to knit. There's arrows that have appeared here, meaning it is 2 rows of knitting. That time it only took 2 passes of the lace carriage. When we returned over here, no needles came forward. This time it will take 4. Generally, you will always have 2 rows of knitting in between each section of lace transfers. However, you do have to check your manual to make sure, as they do change up some patterns. Anytime you see the turnaround here, it means it is time to knit. Now we will go into doing thread weaving. We will be using the pattern card number 1 that comes with your set for this demonstration. Again, we will place it into the machine. Locking our pattern card on row 1 and turning our KC button on, we will knit 1 row across. At this point, we will thread our thread weaving thread in front of the carriage in this position. We also must make sure that we have our weaving brushes on, because that's what makes our pattern weave. Any needle that is forward will have this thread woven on it. Now we release that color, bring it to the other side of the carriage so that it is now in front of the groove on this side of the carriage, and knit 1 row. Each row you will have to change the side that the thread weaving yarn is on. You can use very heavy weights on the standard gauge machine with your weaving yarn, because it is not actually knitting. It is only having the thread laid over the yarn. We have now created some fabric with thread woven yarn involved. You can also use some very nice hand knitting yarns that have a lot of nub and texture to them, because it does not affect the knitting of the needle. The yarn is being laid into the latches. Now when I remove this from the machine, you will see the sample of lace that we originally did, and you will also see how thread weaving looks. Thread weaving is shown from the wrong side of the fabric and not the right side. This is our thread woven sample here at the top, where we have woven the thread into the fabric. Our lace work would be from the front side, and this is what the lace work looks like here. This was fishnet lace that we used. We will now discuss isolation on the knitting machine. Our machines have the capability of isolating in between certain pattern stitches on the machine. If you look at your needle bed, you will see from the red, or from 12 on this side of the machine to 12 on this side of the machine, you have a red bar. That means that your 24 stitch pattern card is being repeated in that section on the machine. Then if you look from needle number 13 over to needle number 36, you will see no red bar. That would be your next section of 24 repeat. Likewise is true on the other side of the machine. If you want to set up for isolation, you must use your isolation bars that come with the machine, and they are placed onto the knitting machine for knitting purposes. Once you have determined where you want to isolate, you must place the isolation bar in that position. You will there is a little bow on one side here that you line up with your bow on this side of the machine and place these grommets down into the needle bed, pushing this back against your rail. You will set your SM key on. You will knit one row across, and it will only select pattern needles where you have placed your isolation bar. You will advance your card forward, thread in your second color, place in your MC button only, and knit one row across. Now when doing isolation, it is very important that you wrap your end needles, otherwise you will have holes where the fairaisle starts and stops. You want to start, before you start, have a long piece of main color yarn available to use for your wrapping purposes. You want one for one side of your work and one for the other side. You will only wrap on cam's side, and the second needle out from the first needle that was in pattern position will be brought forward slightly. You will E-wrap on that needle and push the other needle back. Knit one row across. Now we will do it on the opposite side of the needle bed, bringing that needle forward, then bringing it back to normal knit position. You will be wrapping every other row, but only on the carriage side of the machine each time. If you do not do this, you will find that you have a hole and you will be not happy with the final product. When you get to an area where you have determined it is time to shape your V-neck or round neck or any other shaping where you're placing stitches into hold, what you want to do first of all is take your carriage to the side and keep it going in the direction of where you're going to start your shaping. Now you are going to make note of what row your pattern card is on. In this case, it happens to be on row 15. You will place the number of needles required in your pattern to holding position, and you will place your hold button on. Now you will go ahead and knit this side of your garment, doing whatever shaping is required for what you are doing. If it's a decrease, you just go ahead and do your normal decrease. Remember to watch your needles to see what they are doing so that you put them back in the proper position after you have done your decrease. You will remove those stitches from the machine, and you will take your carriage opposite the side that you want to be knitting on. At this time, you must take the stitches that are on the machine and manually put them back into the latches of the needles that are still in working position. If you forget and do not put them back into the latches when you take your carriage across the machine, the stitches will drop off of the knitting machine. We now have our stitches in normal V pattern position. At this point, we will return our pattern card to row 15 where we started our shaping of our neckline. We will put our KC button back on, we will place our part button on, and take one pass across the knitting machine. Make sure that your pattern card is locked on row 15 so that it does not advance. We have now selected that same row that we had in the machine when we divided for our neckline. We will remember to advance our card, place our first and second colors in the appropriate feeders, place our MC button back on, and knit the other side of our garment, shaping as we did the first side. When we are done with this side, we will again remove this shoulder on scrap and ravel cord. We have had a problem with our knitting and developed a tail on the side opposite our carriage where we need to rip up a row of knitting. First of all, what you will do is you will place all the needles on your knitting machine back to normal B pattern or knitting position. Then carefully, with each color of thread, you will rip up the row of knitting. After you have ripped up this row of knitting, you will return your pattern card by one row, because we ripped up one row. If you had ripped up 2 or 3, you would turn it back for 2 if you'd ripped up 2, 3 if you had ripped up 3. We will lock the pattern card again on row 1 or sequence 1. We will place our leading part button on, which will release our MC button, and we will take one pass across the carriage or across the machine with our carriage. At this point, we will rethread our carriage with the appropriate needle colors going in the right sequence. We will release our part button with the plain key and set our MC button back for knitting. Advance our pattern card so that it will move and go on with our knitting. Hi, we use the color changer in order to allow us to change colors efficiently every couple of rows without having to actually manually do it ourselves. The color changer enables the work to be done by the machine. We use it in tuck work as well as fairaisle work. After you have threaded your color changer, you do want to change the presser assembly to the color changer assembly. You must make sure that the color you are going to be knitting with, that the button has been pushed forward so that it will release that color and knit for you. You will notice that when I knit across the machine, the thread will now come from this angle and will not come from the antenna. Now, if I want to change colors every 2 rows, it's a matter of coming over to this side of the carriage, making sure that my presser plate passes the color changer, then change the color that I want to knit with, release my thread from underneath the color changer. When you come back, you will see that you have changed to the other color. You can knit 2 rows and then again change your color. Make sure you pass the color changer before you change buttons. Always look at your carriage each time you take it past to make sure that it has successfully changed your colors. Sometimes the thread, due to the fuzz, will connect and they won't release one of the colors for you. This has allowed me to do 2 rows of striping, changing the color with the color changer every 2 rows. If you want to do a larger stripe of 6 or 8 rows, you can do that, but in doing that, you need to carry this thread up with you in order to have a good seam. To carry the thread with you, every time your carriage is on the right-hand side of the machine, you will do an E-wrap with that contrast color. E-wrap and knit 2 rows. E-wrap and do 2 rows. E-wrap and do 2 rows. Now we can go back over and change to the other color and make the stripe as wide as we want. Another capability we have with the knitting machine is to program our cards to use with the color changer. The pattern card I have in the machine right now is one that comes with your color changer, and it sets up for tuck work. We will program from the left-hand side of the machine, from the right-hand side. This is the one time that the machine must always be programmed from the right-hand side versus the left-hand side in order to change your colors of the correct row. So what we want to do is turn our KC button on, knit 1 row across, which will select our pattern needles. This is a tuck card, so we press our 2 tuck buttons in. We also must release our card at this time. If you will notice on the punch card you have stars. Every time you see a star come to the drop line here, that means it is time to change the color in your carriage. I will knit 2 rows, and you will note that the star has appeared. We go over and change to our second color, and we knit 2 rows. Again, the star has appeared, so we go over, change our color, and knit 2 rows. Before showing you what the tuck stitch looks like in multicolored tuck, we will go on with fairaisle and show you how to use your single bed color changer with a fairaisle setting. Again, you will use your punch card and you will program from the right-hand side of the machine to the left. We have threaded up our second antenna, which we have placed here at the side of our machine because we will now be going into a third color. We have taken our thread and placed our main color into the B feeder, which is located at the very front of your presser plate. The only color that will be changing every 2 rows will be these 2 colors here, and they will be rotating as they were before. We will use our MC button for knitting in two color fairaisle with the color changer. You will watch your card here to follow when the star moves. That is when it is time, or when you come to the star, that is when it is time for you to change color. Delete that. You notice that the star has dropped at the line of the pattern card here, so we will go over and change to the other color. Now we will remove this from the machine and show you what 3-color work looks like off of the knitting machine. Here we did our striping when we first started with our knitting. Here we have gone into 2-color tuck work using 2 colors, and here we have gone into 3-color fairaisle with our main color being white, our contrast color changing from the dark pink to the light pink. When you originally opened up your set of punch cards that came with your machine, you found that with the bulky 260 you received 15 pre-punched pattern cards. On the standard gauge machine you received 20 cards. With the machines you can also punch your own cards by buying extra blank punch cards. These cards will be marked with the appropriate pattern and then punched out by you. There are volumes of books available with patterns in them, and the one I have chosen to work from is the Let's Start Machine Knitting. We will mark the dark spots here onto this punch card. You will count over the white spots, and where you see the dark holes is where you will make a mark. So on this first card we have 3 white spots, and then we have 2 black. Then you will count over to the next grouping of black holes and again make your mark. You will move up the punch card in this manner, marking each row of the punch card so that you know where to punch your holes for making your own designs. You can do your own designing as well as take patterns from other books. Once you have marked your card, it will look like this when it is completed. You must have a row of solid dots or holes at the very beginning of your card, and you must as well end the card with solid holes. This is so that you can connect the card and it will flow through your machine evenly. Once you have marked your card, you can place it into the punch machine to do the automatic punching, or there is a hand punch that is available that hand punches it just like a paper punch. On the automatic one, what you do is you hit this little orange button on the side of the machine and it moves it over to where you have your hole marked. At that point you will press down on the puncher and it will make a hole in the card. If you want a hole in the next spot, you place the presser plate down again and it makes another hole. Then you will move the puncher over to the position of the next hole and punch down. You will roll the pattern card forward, move it over to the other side, and again go across, punching holes where you have made your black dots. You do need to turn, if you are using the automatic punch, when you get to the end of your card, the last few rows should be turned and placed into the puncher this way. Otherwise, you will have your card go off track and then be punched from this side working down in this direction.